It seems that one of the things Hollywood is most fond of these days is bringing back actors and actresses to reprise roles they haven't played in nearly a decade or more. I won't state all of them from this year alone, as I wouldn't dare spoil other movies on purpose unless I'm reviewing those films in particular, so don't worry, I'll only be spoiling the Matrix movies in this one. Personally speaking, I have no issues with people stepping back into the shoes of a character they once took on, so long as it's done well. But you see, it's that so long as it's done well part that could get awfully messy sometimes. And that perfectly brings me to the topic of this video, the significantly heavy difference between the original Matrix and the recently released newest addition to the franchise, Matrix Resurrections. Let me just start off by saying that other than some returning characters and a few too many revisited plot points, these two movies could not feel more different from one another. One of them is a well-paced, intelligent, grounded yet groundbreaking story, where the other is a self-indulging, convoluted cash grab.
I'll let you guess which one is which.
It's really a shame they couldn't get Lana Wachowski to return for... Wait a fucking second, they did? Both of these movies are written and directed by the same person? Fuck me, I never would have been able to guess. The last time I remember feeling like this was when I realized that Patty Jenkins wrote and directed both Wonder Woman and Wonder Woman 1984. Is it a coincidence that those are all Warner Bros. Films? Yeah, who knows. I did myself the favor/mistake of watching the original Matrix directly before making it through Resurrections, and I was left with such a reaction that I couldn't help but immediately get to writing this. So here we go. Nearly every single thing that I loved and enjoyed so much about the first film was either stripped away of its importance or transformed into something that pretends to be better than what came before it when deep down it knows damn well it isn't. I understand that this may seem unfair or irrelevant, as the intention of Resurrections was not to remake the original, and yet it takes so many beats from it that it's nearly impossible to not recognize some comparisons between them, more so than the second or third installments. Take the opening scene, for example. It all plays out in a practically identical format, from the ominous phone call being heard that leads into a group of agents attempting to detain Trinity, and yet the level of intensity is incredulously on opposite ends of the spectrum. In the original, when Smith and his agents first arrive to the scene, there's an immediate atmosphere of intimidation that vibes off of them, and when Smith speaks his first words, it leaves you a bit shook. Not just from what he says, but from Hugo Weaving's cold, emotionless performance and his way of delivering the lines. Believe me, we'll get back to that later. But even aside from Smith, the scene as a whole does a wonderful job of setting a peculiar but incredibly intriguing tone, whereas the opening in Resurrections feels like you're watching a very well-produced fan remake of the original scene. They attempt to throw a curveball by having fake Morpheus be the leading agent, but the what's going on here factor almost instantly wears off when you realize who and what he really is. On that note, if he's merely a program that became self-aware on his own at some point, then what the hell's the purpose of Bugs giving him the choice between the red or blue pill? Was it forgotten that the choosing of the pill isn't simply a symbolic one? In the original, Neo taking the red pill allowed for Morpheus and his team to track down and locate the pod that held his body in the real world. How the fuck would giving that pill to a program be of any benefit? Nah, forget that logic. In this new story, it appears the choice seemingly just proves you're down for the rebellious cause, so shut up and drink the Kool-Aid. It feels careless in comparison to how it began and throws some legitimate creativity out the window. But let's not just rehash the opening scene beat for beat and line for line. Let's rip out and add in multiple bits from the first movie. Shit, let's even add clips from the first one while our newer, shittier characters speak those same exact lines of dialogue. I can't even look at this as fan service gone wrong. It just comes off as lazy. They do this so many times throughout the movie, and not one of those moments came off as meaningful or had any purpose. They were just there to make you go, oh man, I remember that from the first one. And it isn't just lackluster repetition of previously superior scenes, it's the amount of eye-rolling meta moments they attempt to shoehorn in. Like the first time we meet the new Smith in Resurrections. In this iteration, Smith is portrayed as Neo's boss at a video game company where the initial trilogy of Matrix films is revealed to be games designed by Neo himself, and when our protagonist gets called in for a meeting with this schmuck, the very first thing he says is an iconic quote from the real Agent Smith, while snippets of the original scene are quickly cut in. And it just doesn't land. Remember when I brought up Hugo Weaving's performance and delivery? That's exactly what's missing here. Fake Smith gives off a vibe of a college frat boy that just graduated and was handed a way too important job by his parents to keep him busy. He has the screen presence of a fucking doormat here, and his acting felt like a high school drama student desperately trying to win the award of overachiever. Hugo Smith was disturbingly menacing and strategically calculated. His speech pattern was ominous and threatening and sounded like what a vindictive program may actually speak like. From what I understand, Hugo was approached to reprise the role of Smith, but was unable to due to scheduling conflicts. And perhaps that was fate working in his favor, because as nice as it would have been to have him back, Smith plays such a low priority role in most of this film that it would have felt like a waste of his time. But you couldn't get anyone better than this? Whose nephew is this? He must be related to one of the producers or some shit, because there's no way they couldn't find anyone more suited for this role. Everything he does and says feels nothing like the Smith we've come to know, and you'd honestly never know that's who he is if they never referred to him as such. Then comes the meta comments. The purpose of this meeting between Neo and Fake Smith is to explain that Warner Bros. Has decided to go through with the sequel game to the trilogy, whether they want to be involved or not. Fuck you, movie! The sad part is, it tries to come off as a tongue-in-cheek joke and poke fun at itself, when all it really does is make you not want to take the story seriously. It comes off as a cheap parody of itself, and the reason that's so jarring and hard to accept is because the original film took itself seriously. It was presented in a way that made you stop and think about what your definition of real is, and showed a fascinating insight as to what that could be like to explore. Neo in the first Matrix is a computer hacker that already has a funny hunch the world around him is fabricated. It makes sense that he's seeking out what he is, and as a viewer, you're right there with him as his curiosity unfolds into life-altering revelations. You feel the stakes when Neo is found by Trinity, Morpheus, and the others, because you begin to comprehend the state humanity is truly in, and the importance of what lies ahead of them. You take it seriously. Resurrections is presented in a way that could be looked at similarly to what Scary Movie is to Scream. You can acknowledge that each has an enormous number of similar properties, but one is a sincere attempt at placing you within a story in a different world, while the other wants you to point out the absurdities and laugh at said world. They both have the right to exist and can serve as a form of entertainment, but in no way do they feel like they should be part of the same franchise. Fake Morpheus is another great example of this. You could argue this is more understandable due to this not actually being Morpheus, but a program designed to be like him, but it still doesn't justify his way of acting like a dude from Comic-Con that just got called in last minute to be Laurence Fishburne's replacement. He, just like Fake Smith, acts exceptionally different to what we know as Morpheus, cracks way too many jokes, and the significance of his role in this is horribly diminished. It's arguable if he was even necessary here, which is heartbreaking when you consider the importance of Morpheus in the original film. Then there's Neo. Although it was nice to see him not be stripped away of his powers, having to see him go through unlocking them again was a complete waste of time. Truthfully, his whole arc in the first half of Resurrections is nearly a waste of time. Have you seen the first half of the first Matrix? Then you've seen the first half of Resurrections. Want to see a replay of Neo discovering he's in the Matrix? Want to see him wake up in another pot of goo? Want to see him introduced to a much less interesting and likable version of the team we saw in the original? Want to see another kung fu match against another Morpheus? No, we fucking don't. To make it worse, the stakes for his character are laughable in comparison to before. The first Matrix portrayed him basically as a Jesus-like character that would save all of humankind from the wicked grasp of the machines. But no, those lies you were fed for 3 movies were all a misdirection. It's not all of humankind he's worried about, it's Trinity. Only Trinity. Because it's the 2 of them that are the one, or some shit like that. That is one of his 2 purposes of being in the film. His second is to act as a personification of Warner Bros. So that they can blow themselves in their own movie and have you pay for it. How many lines do you need to have thrown towards Neo about how amazing his creations are, how his games changed their lives, and how they can't believe he made such masterpieces? For fuck's sakes, we get it. Some people made a phenomenal movie released by your studio 20 years ago. It's a completely respectable feat until you start shoving it in people's faces. It's just more of that meta bullshit that doesn't belong here. But back to the saving of Trinity and Trinity herself. Her newfound significance here felt so forced. She was already a badass standout character who played an integral role to the story. Trying to act as though she has also always been the one makes absolutely no sense here. And it's hard to even appreciate her return as she doesn't remember that's who she is until 2 hours into the movie. The only other character I wanted to quickly speak about is Neil Patrick Harris. As the therapist, he's great. But when it's found out that he's actually a program known as the Analyst who discovered that Neo and Trinity's resurrected love is what perfectly powers the Matrix, it all becomes a bit silly. And his decision to let Neo even attempt to rescue Trinity from the Matrix was completely nonsensical for a highly sophisticated program that's primary focus is to not let that happen. But it isn't just the characters and story that suffer in Resurrections. The action goes from impressive hand-to-hand choreography to Neo just being a Jedi now and force pushing every bullet and bad guy out of his way. The pacing goes from a smooth tempo that highlights only what it needs to a dragged out mess that tries whatever it can to keep your attention. Most people would argue that's because of how long this movie is. At 2 hours and 28 minutes, Resurrections is the longest Matrix film to date. That's only 12 fucking minutes longer than the first movie, and yet it feels like it's 12 hours longer. If it wanted to be this clusterfuck of self-indulgence, the least it could have done was tighten up the runtime. So, with all of this being said, I lead myself to the question that is the title of this video. Should the Matrix have been resurrected? No. It was a perfectly wrapped up storyline that was just fine where it was and didn't need to be continued. As a matter of fact, I'm gonna go as far as saying that I don't even consider this to be canon. I'm aware that just because I think that doesn't mean it isn't canon, but I just mean that as in the original trilogy, flaws and all, was good and done. I'll acknowledge this new one's existence, but it very much feels like it's its own separate thing, and I'm more than fine if they don't continue with that thing any further. But of course, I'd still love to know what you all thought about this new Matrix movie. Were you just as let down as I was? Possibly even more let down? Or did you find it to be a fun ride that was just a very expensive excuse to bring back some of your favorite characters to the big screen? Most of all, I'd be curious to hear your thoughts on this one in comparison to the original. Thank you for sticking around this whole time. Like the video if you enjoyed this content, hit that subscribe button and the notifications bell so you can keep up with all the future stuff coming to this channel, and I'll catch you at the next video.